41. Jane had all but forgotten about the company's annual business meeting. It had so closely coincided with David's death. TRX Automotive's annual business meeting was a 2-day affair, held every year, as the name of the event suggested. For 2 days, representatives of TRX Automotive's various subsidiaries from around the globe convened at the company's Novi headquarters just outside Detroit. There they were subjected to about 16 hours of mind-numbing speeches from upper management and no small number of PowerPoint slides. The annual business meeting was long, drawn out, and inevitably boring. Even Martin, a vice president no less, occasionally cracked jokes about it. But everyone understood that such meetings were fixtures of corporate life. And the annual business meeting did have its positive sides. For one thing, it provided an opportunity to see colleagues from the company's far-flung subsidiaries, like one Kaji Wongsuwon from TRX Thailand. After Martin left her office, Jane thought long and hard about her next course of action. She had thrown Lawan away, she was almost sure of that, and the doll had come back. She also believed, though she would never, ever be able to prove as much to a hypothetical jury, that Lawan had had a part in David's death. Maybe a big part. Jane took the doll home with her that night. She was openly afraid of it, but the last time she had deliberately discarded it, someone whom she loved had died. Jane thought about her parents, still in good health but vulnerable. If she left Lawan unattended in her office, would it appear overnight in her parents' home? She had a brother who was married with children. There were many ways the doll could strike her without physically harming her. She had another idea. She would carry out her plan tomorrow. She would find Kaji. She would thereby rid herself of Lawan. Jane placed the doll in her front passenger seat, as if Lawan were a real child. Just like the real Lawan, she thought, as crazy as that long-ago child had been. On the way home, she tried to ignore the presence in the seat beside her. Lawan, with her angelic smile and neatly arranged pigtails, was impossible to ignore. Jane's car was stopped at a stoplight. She turned to the doll and shouted at it, "Is this the way you did to David? Well, you might have surprised him, but I already know you're here. I'm ready for you." Lawan said nothing, did not move. Just a doll, nothing more. Jane noticed the driver of the car beside her, a 50-ish woman in a business suit, a professional type like Jane. The woman saw Jane shouting at a doll she had arranged in the front seat like a real child. The woman was no doubt thinking that Jane was delusional, off her proverbial rocker. And perhaps she was. That might be preferable to the alternative, that all of this was real, that she was quite sane, but the doll that Kaji had sent her was truly haunted by the ghost of a deceased girl. 42. Jane had been incredibly brave for a brief while. This was what she told herself. She had faced the impossibly returned doll head-on. She had made the decision to take it home with her once again, lest it do more damage. She had even confronted it in her car, taunting it to do to her as it had done to David. Once she was home in her condo, though, her courage began to falter. She opened the front closet at the edge of the foyer. She pushed aside her spare coats and empty luggage, then tossed Lawan in the back of the enclosure as she had contemplated when she had first brought the doll home. "I can't have it looking at me now," she thought. "Not after it returned to me, or at least that's what I think." Despite the pills skewing her memories, despite what Martin had said about seeing the doll in her office for some time now, Jane believed that her assessment of events, her worst-case scenario, had to be correct. That night she slept fitfully, despite taking another Zolpidem. She imagined David in bed beside her, arguing with her about the doll once again. But now his line of argument had changed. "Why did you put poor little Lawan in the closet?" he asked, his question a harsh rebuke. "She's our only child, after all, the only one we're ever going to have." She awoke abruptly from that dream, panting, gasping for air. As she awakened, she became aware of sounds. There was a minor clamor in the front of the condo unit. One internal voice told her that she really should get up to investigate, but another told her that she could just as well remain in bed and let the matter go. Lightning only struck so many times in the same person's lifetime, within the same proximity of time and space. She had endured so much of late. David's death, most of all, and evidence that her worst fears about Kaji's evil gift might be true. It did not figure that amid all of that, she would be the victim of a burglary too. In the morning, Jane was not sure how much she had actually slept or if she had taken another sleeping pill during the night. She could count them and find out, she supposed. Then she forgot about the pills when she saw Lawan on her sofa, seated on the middle cushion. The front closet door was open. Several coats and a piece of luggage were strewn on the floor. Jane recalled the noises she had heard last night. "Come at me!" she shouted. Jane stood before the doll, trembling with fear and rage. She had to be brave, to honor David's memory. She owed him that much. "Why is it that you never do anything when I can see you?" she shouted in challenge. "Are you afraid of me?" The irony of that question struck her, and she heard herself emit a dry little laugh. She stood there, facing down Lawan, waiting for the doll to move or speak, or for the ghost of the once-human Lawan to appear. But none of that happened. Finally, she turned away and walked back into her bedroom to ready herself for the workday. 43. TRX. Automotive's annual business meeting was held in the auditorium at the company's Novi headquarters. TRX, like many corporate entities, had in recent years developed the trendy affectation of referring to its main office complex as a campus, though practically no one among the employee ranks ever referred to it as such. There was no assigned seating. The auditorium was filled on a first-come, first-served basis. Jane walked into the thrumming mass and tried to spot Kaji among the hundreds of people in attendance. Finding a seat for herself would be difficult enough. She found a seat in the middle of the vast crowd. At the center of the stage, the master of ceremonies, a vice president of accounting, was testing the microphone at the podium, his face cast in angular shadows by the overhead stage lights. Even he seemed to regard the forthcoming proceedings as an arduous, forced march. This was going to be a long day, and she might not have a chance to confront Kaji. When Martin spoke in her ear, Jane almost cried aloud. "Are you all right?" Martin said in a low whisper, but loud enough so that he could be heard above the general buzz of conversation. Jane swiveled around in her seat. The auditorium was laid out like a classical amphitheater. Each row of seats was slightly more elevated than the one closer to the stage. Therefore, Martin, being seated behind her, was also slightly above her. "I'm doing much better, thanks," she said. She did not believe her own words, and she doubted that Martin believed them either. "That's good, Jane. I'm glad to hear it. We have some important projects ahead of us, you know." "Absolutely." Jane forced her best boardroom smile. She was relieved to hear the accounting VP call for everyone's attention. Her conversation with Martin would not be a long one. She avoided Martin during the shortened lunch break and during the day's two smaller breaks. Although she looked for Kaji, there was no sign of the Thai woman. Then, as everyone was filing out of the auditorium at 5 p.m., Jane finally caught sight of Kaji and Ram. They were leaving by the exit on the opposite side of the auditorium. There was no way Jane could thread her way through the crowd in time to reach them. They were almost certainly headed for their rental car. Jane could theoretically have waited until the second day of the annual business meeting. That was not an acceptable option. If she missed Kaji during tomorrow's gathering, she would elude her indefinitely, perhaps. Kaji and Ram were probably scheduled on an evening flight to Bangkok tomorrow. Jane therefore returned to her departmental office. Leslie, the group's administrative assistant, was preparing to leave for the day. Leslie was a divorced mother in her 30s. She struggled with childcare issues. She left work in a hurry each day to pick up her children from daycare, from their babysitter, or some combination thereof. "Leslie!" Jane hailed. "Oh, hi." Leslie was pretending that she was glad to see Jane. Leslie was clearly no more glad to see Jane right now than Jane had been happy to see Martin in the seat behind her in the auditorium. Leslie thought she had escaped for the day. Well, Jane would not detain her for very long. "Leslie, I needed to talk to one of the foreign subsidiary reps, but I missed her at the meeting. I was wondering if you would be able to tell me which hotel she's staying at." Leslie, Jane knew, would have access to this information. Each department at the headquarters customarily made hotel arrangements for the global subsidiary representatives who fell under its purview. As the administrative assistant for the Asian supply chain team, Leslie would have made hotel arrangements for Ram and Kaji. "You don't have her cell number?" Leslie asked. Leslie said this without sarcasm. It was a legitimate question. Jane came back with a nimble response. "No, I don't have a cell number for her. I always call her at her desk." "Oh," Leslie said. "Let me check the hotel information then." Leslie consulted a notepad on her desk blotter. "Everyone from the Asian group is staying at the Marriott in Novi. I think you know where that is." "Yes, of course. Thank you, Leslie." Jane had Lawan in her car, stowed securely in the trunk this time. It was a short drive to the Marriott in Novi, and then Jane would be completely free of that doll, for once and for all. 44. Jane had developed what she thought was a general understanding of the way this all worked. The doll had been given to her and she had accepted it, albeit acquiescently. She could not throw the doll away. If she tried that, it would come back to her. Crazy. Ridiculous. How many times had she used those two words to refer to her own thoughts in recent weeks? But she was sure that she had put Lawan away in the closet before going to bed, only to find the closet door open and the doll on her living room sofa in the morning. The pills were blurring her mind, that much was true, but they hadn't completely disconnected her from reality. Yet. Nevertheless, she would have to quit the sleeping pills soon. The drive to the Marriott would have been short, had Jane not left at the height of the evening rush hour. The suburbs around Detroit were becoming overdeveloped and overpopulated, even as the city itself was hollowing itself out. There were areas of the inner city, directly to the south, where one could find blocks and blocks of empty, decaying buildings. She had heard that on the radio earlier in the week. Or had Martin told her that today, during the annual business meeting? Jane placed a cool palm to her forehead. She had to get herself under control. She walked into the lobby of the Marriott, Lawan under one arm. Despite all that had happened, Jane wasn't overly squeamish about handling the doll. It could have smothered her while she slept any number of nights, if that had been its purpose. Lawan reserved her real violence for others, like David. Jane headed for the front desk. She would ask the front desk attendant to ring Kaji's room. If Kaji had gone out for dinner, Jane would wait for her in the lobby, Lawan at her side. For once, though, Jane found herself in luck. Just before she reached the front desk, she made a sidelong perusal of the lounge area, adjacent to the lobby. Kaji and Ram were seated at a small table, not talking, by the look of them, but nursing 2 beers and what looked like hamburgers. Hamburgers, Jane thought. The quintessential American food. She couldn't count how many of her foreign colleagues, when visiting the U.S. for the first or second time, asked to be taken out for a genuine American hamburger. Neither Kaji nor Ram saw Jane approach until she was upon them, ambush style. "I believe this is yours," Jane said without preamble, holding the doll out to Kaji. Ram stopped eating and glared silently at Jane. Kaji looked briefly at Jane, at the doll, and then looked away. "The doll is yours," Jane repeated. "Please take it. I don't want it anymore." "If you don't want it," Kaji said, still staring straight ahead, "then throw it away." 45. Over the course of their professional relationship, Jane had met Kaji in person perhaps 4 or 5 times. The Thai woman had always gone out of her way to be friendly and compliant. Jane was not technically her boss, but as a manager at the corporate headquarters, Jane was higher in the informal corporate pecking order. Now, however, Kaji seemed to regard Jane as a recalcitrant waitress or a wayward chambermaid. "I can't take it back to Thailand with me. I thought it would be a nice gift for you. Like I said, you can throw it away if you don't want it." "It isn't that simple," Jane replied. "But I suspect you already know that, don't you?" "Please," Kaji said, continuing her tacit refusal to look at Jane. "You're making a scene. What would Martin Tully think of this? What would TRXHR have to say?" The implied threat was very apparent. From a corporate HR perspective, Jane was attempting to thrust an unwanted object on a colleague who had explicitly expressed a preference for her to cease and desist. There was no way Jane was going to sit before either Martin or corporate HR and spin some story about a curse. If push came to shove, Jane would lose this battle. The rules of the game allowed Kaji to turn the protocols of corporate behavior against her. TRX might take pity on Jane, given her recent personal difficulties, which was another way of saying that they might terminate her with a halfway decent severance package versus simply terminating her. Jane had long experience with such maneuvering. She hadn't attained her position at such a young age without learning the rules, without mastering all the intricacies of corporate political gamesmanship. She had also handled passive-aggressive behavior before. That was a tactic that could be turned around, if you kept your cool. "Very well," Jane told Kaji. "If that's the way you've decided to play this, there's a little divan out in the lobby. I'm going to leave this damned doll, your little girl as you once described her, out on that divan. You're staying at this hotel for 2 nights, so that will suffice for giving her back, if I understand the way this thing works." Jane did not give either Kaji or Ram a chance to reply, not that they seemed inclined to reply anyway. She spun around and walked resolutely into the adjacent lobby. As promised, she placed Lawan on a white divan that formed part of an island of furniture in the center of the polished tile floor. "Let this be the last I ever look at you," she thought, as she set the doll down. With that done, she made for the exit. Perhaps she would sleep tonight. She might require a pill, but she would quit them soon. 46. An African-American security guard had materialized at the front door of the hotel. Jane had not noticed him when she'd entered, but there was nothing particularly unusual about that. She had been focused on locating Kaji. The guard was at least 6 feet, 3 inches tall, and he had the build of an NFL linebacker. His head was shaved, and his exposed pate was shiny in the glow of the overhead fluorescent lights. The guard's attentive stare made clear that he was waiting for Jane to approach. This did make her a little nervous. She didn't recall shouting at Kaji or otherwise making a scene, but given her recent mental state, a misjudgment of her own behavior wouldn't be inconceivable. If the guard's intention was to gently reprimand her for accosting 2 hotel guests, then fine, so be it. She would endure the guard's spiel contritely, so that the situation wouldn't escalate and then become known at TRX. She had no idea how she might handle any of this should it become a TRX human resources matter. When Jane was a few paces away from the door, the guard stepped forward. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, "but you left someone in the lobby." The guard was referring to the doll, obviously. It was strange that he'd used the term someone rather than something. Was he trying to be ironic? "Oh," Jane replied, as nonchalantly as she could. "That doll belongs to the woman in the hotel lounge. The woman's name is Kaji Wongsuwan. She's a guest from Thailand. She'll pick it up once she's done with her meal and her drink." The security guard slowly shook his head. "I don't think so, ma'am. That little girl's going to get lonely if you leave her there like that. It isn't the right thing to do." The guard swayed ever so slightly on his feet. He righted himself. Then he looked at Jane with fresh determination. "Please go back and get that little girl. Take her with you." "What?" For a moment, Jane thought that the guard might be intoxicated, or this might be nothing more than a bored man who was taking a bit of circumstantial humor too far. In either case, he was effectively barring her way. Jane was about to ask him to step aside. "Enough already, please," when the guard preempted her. The hotel security guard looked directly into her eyes and spoke in a lilting tonal language. Jane did not understand the words, of course, for Thai was incomprehensible to her, though she had on occasion been able to decipher it in dreams. But there was no mistaking the language. It was Thai, a language that almost no one learned outside the borders of Thailand. "Go get the little girl," the guard repeated, in English now. "Take her home. You're her mommy after all." Jane was abruptly pushed into a daze. She stepped backward, turned around toward the divan. The guard smiled and nodded as she picked up Lawan and tucked the doll under her arm. The security guard gave her a broad grin and stepped aside as she approached the exit this time. "You have a nice evening, ma'am," he said. On the way out, Jane was almost certain that she saw a diminutive figure standing there with the guard. A young girl, shadowy, there but not there, partly covered with the filth of her rice paddy grave. 47. Jane did a double-take when she opened her email application at work and saw what appeared to be an email from Ram, Kaji's boss. The Thai man had always gone out of his way to avoid direct contact with Jane. A week had passed since the annual business meeting, since the abortive attempt to return Lawan to Kaji at the hotel. Jane had made no further attempt to contact Kaji about the doll, and there had been no work issues that provided a legitimate pretext. And anyway, what good would it do? If Kaji had not accepted the doll in person, what were the odds of forcing her acquiescence now? Jane could simply ship the doll back, of course, and Kaji would doubtless return it. Jane could easily imagine a scenario in which she and Kaji repeatedly shipped the doll back and forth to their respective offices. That would incur the notice and the wrath of HR sooner or later, and it would not accomplish Jane's objective, to be rid of the doll for once and for all. The doll, it seemed, had to be willingly accepted in order for transference to occur. There might have been a short window of time when she'd first received the doll, when she might have shipped it back immediately without consequence, but that window had passed. Jane had taken possession of it. Lawan was hers now. Since that incident in the lobby of the Marriott, she had not taken it out of her condo again. Lawan was in her old place, atop the bookcase in the spare bedroom. Ram's email got directly to the heart of the matter. It contained no corporate misdirection. No pleasantries. I know why you wanted to return the object to Kaji. I can help you. Make a reason to come to Thailand and bring the object with you. How to reply to Ram, if at all? Jane did not trust Ram, and she suspected any number of tricks and deceptions. For starters, why had this long-awaited communication come from Ram, finally, instead of from Kaji? Jane noticed that Kaji had not been copied on the email, which made sense. The clear implication here was that Ram was acting independently and perhaps against his subordinates' wishes. She was tempted to delete the email, but she was just as tempted to grasp this chance, or what might be a chance, to solve her problem. It took her less than a minute to decide. "I'll be there," she typed. "In 3 days." She contrived an excuse for her sudden business trip to Thailand. TRX Automotive was a hierarchical corporation. Everyone reported to someone, and the typical boss asked a lot of questions. To her surprise, however, Martin showed no suspicion about her trip. On the contrary, he seemed glad to see what appeared to be her renewed attention to work. "Well," Martin said when Jane told him about the trip, "you haven't been to TRX Thailand for a while, and as you know, I'm a strong proponent of getting in FaceTime with your colleagues at the overseas subsidiaries. It's also good to go and observe how operations are going. Boots on the ground, as they say." Jane suppressed a cringe. Some of the TRX managers and vice presidents had a habit of describing the company's business in military metaphors, as if what they did was a matter of life or death, as if lives were at stake with every decision. "In addition," Martin went on a personal note, "I think it would do you good to get out of your familiar surroundings for a few days. It would help your spirits. That's only my personal observation, of course. I hope you don't mind the suggestion." "Not at all," Jane said. Martin had seen her reaction to the doll on at least 2 occasions, but he had apparently thought little of it. He knew that David's death was still troubling her, but he had no idea of the other, less worldly problems she was grappling with. As she walked out of Martin's office, Jane reflected on yet one more interesting turn of events. There was a certain irony here. She could not, in confidence, call Ram a friend or an ally. Ram was, in all likelihood, still very much her adversary in fact, but now she and Ram were perpetrating a joint deception on Martin, albeit a small one in the big scheme of things. 48. Jane did not know exactly what Ram had in mind, however she sensed that a trial awaited her, and the trial would require a clear head. That night she went home and disposed of her last 2 Zolpidem tablets, as well as the over-the-counter pills that she had purchased in recent weeks. She didn't want to put the pills in the trash can. They were still technically accessible there. The dumpster behind the building, too, was an incomplete solution. She couldn't forget that she had thrown Lawan in that dumpster, and Lawan had reappeared. Jane therefore dumped the pills in her commode and watched them swirl away after she pushed the handle. Now they were really, truly gone. She lay awake in bed until around midnight. After that, somewhat to her surprise, she fell asleep and awoke in the morning only moderately drowsy. The day after that, she boarded a plane for Thailand. Per Ram's instructions, she brought the doll along. Since acquiring the unwanted doll, Jane had done some online research about the LUK THEP phenomenon. Some Thai women, she discovered, actually bought airline seats for them and took them on flights as if they were real children. Even if Lawan were not a haunted doll, that would be bizarre, inappropriate, and creepy, Jane thought. She stowed Lawan with her checked luggage. When the aircraft, a Boeing 747, was due south of Hawaii, more or less, Jane had another thought. Could Lawan crash the plane? Would the doll somehow find its way into the cockpit? Probably not, she determined as she drifted off to sleep. And if she managed to rid herself of Lawan in Thailand, she would no longer have to ask such questions. Jane arrived at the TRX Automotive Thailand plant in a taxi, the same as before. There was not much variation in the weather this close to the equator. There was no rain forecast for today, the internet had informed her. The humidity would be near 90%, with a high of 97 degrees Fahrenheit. Jane felt every one of those degrees as she stepped out of the taxi into the blazing sun, the guard shack of the TRX plant before her. She paid the taxi driver, making sure to include some extra baht for a tip. Then she approached the uniformed security guard, who sat behind a window. The guard opened one half of the sliding window that he used to communicate with visitors. "Please step inside," the guard said. He gestured her into the shack. Jane entered through a plain metal door and stepped into the bracing chill of the interior. The tiny building was mercifully air-conditioned. Jane was a Western woman dressed in business attire, which rated her fairly low on the potential threat scale. Nevertheless, the guard's attention was immediately aroused by the object that she carried under one arm, the other bearing her attaché case. Jane had wrapped Lawan in a clean black garbage bag, partly so she would not have to look at the doll, but mostly so it would not attract extraordinary attention. There was a rectangular, bare table at the center of the room. Its purpose was fairly obvious. This was the surface that guards used to inspect laptops, briefcases, and any packages. Terrorism of the jihadist variety was not a major concern in Thailand. The major concern was industrial espionage. At the entrance of every TRX automotive facility throughout the world, visitors' belongings were subjected to a mandatory inspection process. This was true even of visitors from other company affiliates. In this regard, TRX Automotive was by no means unique. Such was the industry standard. "What's in the bag?" the guard asked. He was a young Thai man with a crew cut. Jane placed the bag containing Lawan on the table and rolled down the sides of the bag to show him. The guard smiled. Being a Thai, he was no doubt familiar with the LUK THEP phenomenon. "I didn't know these popular with American women, too." He shook his head. "They aren't really." Then it occurred to Jane that this was an odd object to bring into an automotive components factory, even in Thailand. "This one is a gift," she hastily explained. "It isn't made up like gift," the guard added reasonably. "I didn't have time to wrap it." Jane pantomimed wrapping a gift, just in case the guard was unfamiliar with that particular English verb. It's a surprise." The guard nodded, dubiously, and looked at Lawan, sitting there with her black plastic shroud rolled down around her. Finally, he nodded, probably deciding that there was no figuring out Americans. "But I still have to check your briefcase." "Certainly." Jane lifted her attaché case onto the table and re-enclosed Lawan in the garbage bag. The guard was apparently convinced that the doll posed no threat. "Thank you," the guard said, after a perfunctory inspection of her briefcase. "Have a nice day." 49. Jane walked the distance to the lobby entrance, squinting in the sunshine. She was in good shape, but it was a long walk with both her briefcase and the doll. Once inside the plant's lobby, she interacted with another security guard. The security procedures here were not quite as invasive, but there were procedures nonetheless. Jane could not simply walk back to Ram's office unescorted. She gave the guard her name, Ram's name, and waited in the lobby for Ram to appear. She waited some time. Ram did not appear. Jane began to think that Ram's email might have been a ruse, some complex plan to humiliate or entrap her. Then she heard the guard's phone ring. The guard spoke briefly in Thai and hung up. He made eye contact with Jane and beckoned her forward. "Mr. Thongchai will see you in meeting room 108, the guard said when Jane stepped up to his desk. "Do you need help to find it?" This was unusual. The normal protocol would have been for Ram to walk to the lobby to greet his visitor. Perhaps this was an issue of face. Perhaps it was something else. Oddity on top of oddity. "It's okay," Jane said at length. "I've been to this facility before. I know my way." The guard nodded, smiled. "Okay, I'll buzz you in." Jane walked toward the metal double doors that controlled access between the lobby and the plant. She waited for the buzz and the click as the guard granted access. With both of her hands full, she had to use her shoulder to push her way through. Jane had used meeting room 108 at the Thailand facility during her last visit. She and Kaji had met with several plant personnel there to discuss the impact of the new components from the Vietnamese supplier. So much had changed since then. Any supplier change, any work-related matter seemed trivial in comparison to the matters she now grappled with. Jane walked into the small windowless meeting room. There was a single wooden table and 4 plastic-seated chairs, but no Ram. What kind of game was the Thai manager playing? She had come this far, having lied to her boss. The least Ram could do was to keep their appointment. Having few other options but to wait for Ram, Jane put her attaché case and lawan on the table. She removed lawan from the trash bag. Then she sat down in one of the chairs. "I should never have come," Jane thought, looking at the smiling doll on the table. "There is no way that Ram will help me. He has no reason to want to help me." Then Ram walked in. He barely acknowledged Jane before he looked at Lawan and cringed. 50. "You should cover that," Ram said, pointing at Lawan. Jane was tempted to leave the doll uncovered just to spite Ram. Then she realized she too would prefer the doll be covered. She stood and put Lawan back into the trash bag. "Where is Kaji?" Jane asked. Ram paused before replying, obviously measuring his words. "Kaji is no longer with the company." Ram paused and then rephrased himself. "Or maybe she has taken a leave of absence." Jane knew that Ram wasn't telling her something, that he knew far more than he was letting on, but she decided to let the matter go for the time being. Eventually, she would discover the entire truth. The Thai manager's gaze was fixed on Jane, a resentful stare. Ram apparently knew that something was wrong with the doll. For reasons of his own, he had decided to help her. But what were those reasons? Moreover, Ram was still mad about the supplier issue. Jane sighed. "Ram, maybe we should clear the air." "Excuse me?" He was obviously puzzled. His English was functional, but not as polished as Kaji's. "You are angry. I can see that." "Ah, what you should understand is that I have decided to help you with your problem. I am going to help you, even though you decided to work against me just so you could save the company a few dollars. We're still talking about that Vietnamese supplier, aren't we? Ram, it's my job to save the company money where I can, and for that matter, it's your job." Easy for you to say coming from America. Everybody rich, everything fine. The implication of his words were clear. By changing to the new supplier, Jane had cost Ram money. Well, perhaps they should get to the bottom of this now. "Ram, were you taking money from the old supplier? Did you have some kind of deal going? A kickback?" Ram's cheeks reddened. "Why do you say that?" "Do you deny it? Are you saying you weren't?" Ram gave Jane a spiteful smile. "What does it matter? We have a new supplier now, one from Vietnam that saves the company lots of money. You'll probably get a raise or a promotion, and I will struggle to feed my wife and 2 children." Jane could see that this line of conversation was going to go nowhere, and maybe Ram did have a point. What difference did it make, at this precise moment? Jane felt as if her life were coming apart. The affairs of TRX Automotive could be moved to the back burner for now. "I don't want to argue with you, Ram. All of that is water under the bridge now, or it should be. You called me here because you know something about this doll." She patted the mass beneath the garbage bag. "Why don't you tell me what you know?"